There is a law of power that precedes all others. If 90% of your economy moves by water, you do not own it. You never did. Someone else holds the keys to your survival, and they always have. This is not opinion. This is mathematics applied to geography, applied to the nature of control itself. Iran just learned this lesson in the most expensive possible way. On April 13th at 10 o'clock in the morning Eastern Time, Admiral Brad Cooper commanded CENTCOM to implement what the United States Navy does better than any institution on Earth. They closed the door. 19 ships turned back by April 17th, 6 in the first 24 hours, 10 by April 15th. 19 by April 17th. 0 vessels evaded. That is not aspiration. That is statement of fact. What precipitated this was simple. The Islamabad talks collapsed. Iran refused to remove enriched uranium from its nuclear program. The United States made a decision. Every nation that depends on the sea to breathe economically exists at the pleasure of whoever controls the sea. Iran had forgotten this. Now it remembers. Over 10,000 personnel. 12 or more warships, 100 plus aircraft, the USS Abraham Lincoln, the USS Tripoli, the USS Spruance diverted Iranian-flagged cargo vessels from Bandar Abbas on April 14th, the USS Rafael Peralta. These are not symbols. They are facts of steel and firepower positioned in the Gulf of Oman and the Arabian Sea. The enforcement operates outside the Persian Gulf itself. This matters. They do not need to enter to strangle. The geography does the work once the blockade is sealed. The positioning itself is precise. Picket lines of destroyers and frigates maintain station at choke points, each vessel equipped with radar, satellite targeting, and real-time intelligence feeds from AWACS platforms overhead. Every ship attempting transit receives warning. Every transponder is tracked. Every deviation from normal pattern is logged. The geography becomes inescapable once American power fills it. 90% of Iran's economy fueled by seaborne trade. $400 million per day. Every single day the blockade holds, Iran hemorrhages $400 million. This is what vulnerability looks like when you cannot defend your own shipping lanes. By April 17th, the economic hemorrhage had already reached $800 million. $2 billion by the end of the week. Iran has the 4th largest proven oil reserves on the planet. Iran has natural gas. Iran has been a civilization for 2,500 years. None of it matters if the sea around you belongs to someone else. The mathematics is brutally simple. Iran's government budget depends on petroleum exports. The blockade prevents those exports from leaving the nation's ports. Without those exports, the government cannot fund its military, cannot pay its bureaucracy, cannot stabilize its currency, cannot prevent capital flight. The time frame is measured in months, not years. Indo-PACOM, under Admiral Paparo, conducts parallel interdiction operations globally. This is not merely a Gulf operation. This is worldwide enforcement. Ships that departed Iran before the blockade took effect are being stopped in the Indian Ocean, in the Mediterranean when they attempt transit through the Suez Canal, in Southeast Asian ports where Iranian tankers historically anchored. There is no sanctuary. The mechanism operates through the most powerful tool the United States possesses outside of military force itself. Financial pressure. The United States Treasury pressures financial institutions in the UAE, Hong Kong, and Oman. Banks that process Iranian payments, that finance Iranian shipping, that ensure Iranian vessels face consequences. Sanctions are layered. OFAC designations cut institutions off from the American financial system. Correspondent banking relationships are severed. Insurance companies withdraw coverage. The very infrastructure that allowed Iran to operate globally becomes unavailable. Iran's foreign ministry declared the strait completely open. The Iranian parliament speaker contradicted this immediately, describing the strait as functionally closed to Iranian commerce. The contradiction itself is the proof. When your nation cannot speak with one voice about whether its own critical waterway is open or closed, you have already lost the argument. The Foreign Ministry's statement was made for international audiences, an attempt to maintain the legal fiction that the strait remained accessible under international law. The parliament speaker's statement reflected the economic reality. Iranian vessels could not transit safely because an overwhelmingly superior naval force controlled the waters. This is the vocabulary of a government fractured by the acknowledgement of defeat. Iran attempted the traditional countermeasures: tanker spoofing, flag switching, AIS manipulation. The Malawi flag, officially assigned to a landlocked nation in southern Africa, appeared on Iranian vessels attempting to disguise their origin. Guyana flags followed, a vessel bearing no logical connection to Iranian ownership, but serving as a paper-thin attempt at concealment. Papered vessels and false registries, corporate structures nested through shell companies in third countries, all designed to obscure the true ownership of cargo and the true destination of shipments. The United States Navy responded with boarding teams and visual inspections. Satellite imagery matched vessel profiles to known Iranian tankers regardless of what flag they flew. The spoofing attempts revealed the desperation, not the capability. None of it matters once the decision is made. The sea does not negotiate. It only obeys whoever commands it. The AIS transponders could be turned off, but then vessels became even more visible to radar and satellite. Vessels could hide behind islands near the coast, but then they never reached their destination. There was no technical workaround to the fundamental problem. The United States Navy had decided to enforce a blockade and possessed the capability to make that enforcement absolute. Humanitarian exemptions were granted for inspection. Neutral ships in Iranian ports received a grace period to depart before full enforcement commenced. Medical supplies and humanitarian goods received expedited passage once inspected. Even in choking an economy, the United States maintains the distinction between law and mere force. This is how empires that last actually operate. The distinction matters for the legitimacy of the blockade under international law. It distinguishes enforcement of international law from mere strangulation. The Geneva Conventions require passage of food and medicine. The United States Navy complied with these requirements while implementing the economic blockade. This precision of enforcement matters more than military observers understand, because it determines whether other nations assist in the blockade or whether they begin to mobilize against it. Every nation watching this calculus understands that the blockade is being conducted within legal parameters while still achieving total economic effect. The Iranian sea mines in the Strait since February 28th proved irrelevant to the blockade, though they revealed the depths of Iran's strategic miscalculation. The United States conducted demining operations simultaneously with the blockade implementation, clearing channels through which Iranian shipping might have attempted to pass. But worse for Iran was the discovery that the mines Iran had laid now prevented Iran's own smallest vessels from transiting safely. The mines trapped the very military equipment and supply ships Iran might have used to reinforce its position. You cannot threaten someone who controls everything around you. The psychological weight of this is staggering. Iran spent resources placing mines in a strait it does not control, while pretending the strait remains open. This is the vocabulary of defeat spoken before surrender has been formally acknowledged. The mines became a symbol of Iran's isolation and its miscalculation of the military balance. Alfred Mahan wrote this doctrine 136 years ago. Command of the sea equals command of trade equals command of the life and death of nations. The doctrine contains three immutable principles that cannot be circumvented. The first principle, control of choke points, creates control of all commerce flowing through them. Whoever commands the Strait of Hormuz commands the lifeblood of the global oil market. Whoever controls the Suez Canal controls the traffic between Europe and Asia. Whoever dominates the Malacca Strait controls the commerce of the entire Pacific. These are not abstractions. They are the literal arteries through which the world's economy flows. The second principle, distant blockade defeats close defense. A navy need not enter an enemy's ports to strangle that enemy. By controlling the waters beyond territorial limits, a superior naval power prevents all ingress and egress. Close defense becomes irrelevant because the enemy's navy cannot operate in waters dominated by a superior force. The third principle, economic strangulation operates more completely and faster than military conquest. An army can be defeated on the battlefield, but the nation remains. An economy can be strangled, and the government collapses because the population begins to suffer. Military defeat is a choice. Economic collapse is mathematics. These three principles explain why seaborne empires have dominated human history, and why nations that cannot contest the sea remain permanently subordinate to nations that can. Nothing has changed in 136 years. The Union blockade of the Confederacy during the American Civil War was simply applied Mahan. The war lasted 4 years. The blockade began on April 19, 1861. The cotton economy of the South was strangled because cotton moved by ship, and the Union Navy owned the ships. 4 million bales piled up in warehouses worthless because the sea was closed. The Union blockade was never total in the first years of the war. Confederate vessels ran the blockade regularly. Confederate commerce raiders attacked Union shipping far from American coasts. But as the Union Navy grew larger, the blockade tightened. By 1864, almost no Confederate shipping escaped. The Confederacy possessed no oil to burn, no steel to manufacture at scale, no means to replace ships or weapons destroyed in battle. The blockade broke the Confederacy more effectively than any army ever could. Robert E. Lee surrendered not because his army was defeated, but because his government could not sustain the war. The blockade made sustained war impossible. The British understood this in the First World War. They strangled Germany through distant blockade. No invasion required. The British Navy simply controlled what entered and left the North Sea. Germany attempted to maintain its position through unrestricted submarine warfare, sinking merchant vessels and hoping to starve Britain before Britain starved Germany. Germany's gamble failed. The British blockade was older, tighter, and more absolute. 400,000 German civilians died from malnutrition and disease, not from bullets, from the law of the sea. The Spanish flu raged through a malnourished population in 1818. Infant mortality exploded. Children born during the blockade were permanently stunted in physical development. The elderly died from conditions that adequate nutrition could have survived. These were not military casualties. These were the consequences of seaborne economic strangulation. The British proved Mahan 100 years before this moment with Iran, and in exactly the same waters Admiral Cooper now commands. Operation Earnest Will proved it again in 1987 and 1988, when the polarity reversed, and Iran threatened to choke Western shipping in the same Gulf of Oman. 27 oil tankers were damaged or destroyed during the tanker war. Iran appeared to threaten American naval supremacy in that confined space. The United States Navy demonstrated that even threatened, it maintained absolute control. Iran's threats accomplished nothing because the threat could not be enforced. The historical record was clear then. The historical record is clearer now. The Corfu Channel case established the principle in international law that would govern this moment. The Strait of Corfu is an international waterway. Vessels of all nations have the right of transit, but this right means nothing if one nation possesses the overwhelmingly superior naval force. Rights without the power to enforce them are not rights at all. They are privileges extended by the power holding the sea. Iran has no submarines that threaten modern warships. Iran has no aircraft carriers. Iran has no blue water navy capable of contesting the surface. The law of Corfu Channel applies. Transit rights are universal. Enforcement belongs to whoever has the guns. Brent crude fell 9% to $90.38 by April 17th. The market decline accelerated each day of the blockade as traders calculated the likelihood of sustained disruption. The markets are calming because the markets understand the mathematics. An economy that depends 90% on seaborne trade does not have leverage in any negotiation. It has only time frames. How long until the currency collapses? How long until the government cannot fund its military? How long until the population begins to starve? These are not mysteries. These are calculations. The blockade is already doing them. The Iranian rial, already weakened by years of sanctions, lost another 15% of its value in the first week of the blockade. Capital flight began immediately. Iranian citizens with access to foreign currency moved assets out of the country. Foreign investors withdrew completely. The government faced a choice: deploy foreign currency reserves to stabilize the rial and watch those reserves disappear, or allow the rial to collapse and watch the purchasing power of the entire population evaporate. Both choices lead to the same destination. The blockade is already doing them. Iran's government watches other governments watch what the United States Navy is doing. This is the demonstration effect. The law becomes clearer every single day. If your economy moves by water, you do not own your economy. The Chinese understand this. They build the Belt and Road not from altruism, but from absolute certainty that seaborne dependency is the leverage that never fails. They invest in ports and shipping infrastructure in weak nations, specifically to create financial relationships that give China leverage over those nations' foreign policies. When those nations cannot pay back loans for port development, China controls the ports and therefore controls the nation's access to the global trade system. The Europeans understand this. They maintain the largest military presence in the Mediterranean because whoever does not control the sea loses the game at a level deeper than politics or ideology. The Suez Canal, the English Channel, the Mediterranean itself. Control of these spaces determines economic and political power across the entire European continent. This is why the European Union invests so heavily in naval capability, despite appearing to be a post-military organization. They understand what every imperial power has understood since the Age of Sail. The sea is where power actually lives. The blockade will hold as long as the United States Navy decides it holds. Iran cannot break it. No combination of other nations will break it because no other nation can match American naval supremacy in that region. The Americans have practiced this for 70 years. They have rehearsed every contingency. They have positioned every asset. The mathematics is finished. The only question now is how long Iran's government lasts once the economic truth becomes unbearable. That is the real blockade. The naval blockade is simply the mechanism that enforces it. The government in Tehran faces a time frame, months, not years, before the currency collapses beyond recovery, before the military faces mutiny because soldiers cannot feed their families, before the population begins to demonstrate in the streets not for political freedom, but for bread. The government must make a choice. Accept the American conditions and allow inspections of the nuclear program, or watch the nation collapse under the weight of economic strangulation. There is no military option. There is no negotiating from strength. There is only the mathematics of absolute blockade. This is the law. This is not new. This is Mahon stated in absolute terms and proven by every great power that has ever lived. If 90% of your economy moves by water, you do not own it. You are a tenant in someone else's world. Iran was always a tenant. The blockade simply made the lease terms impossible to ignore. That is what April 13th, 2026 means. That is what the 19 ships mean. That is what Admiral Brad Cooper's 10,000 personnel and 100+ aircraft mean. They mean the rules were never in question. Only the willingness to enforce them was. That willingness has now been demonstrated. The law stands. It always has. It always will.